Final Fantasy XVI is the game we all want to get our hands on, and can you blame us? With the absolute mind-blowing success of Final Fantasy XIV, a game whose rich storytelling has made it become my favorite Final Fantasy game of all time, and one that is currently exploding right now. It's safe to say that Creative Business Unit 3 is currently on a roll, and today the game's producer Naoki Yoshida has decided to provide an update for us. When recently featured on YouTube channel Washigana TV, Yoshida talked about the voice recording process for both Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker and Final Fantasy XVI. And interestingly enough, he has a policy where he doesn't show up for any of the voice recordings, with Yoshida saying, quote, "I've been working on Final Fantasy XIV for 8 years now, but I actually never went to any of its recordings. I'm a scenarist myself, so I know that if I go, I'll step into the writer's shoes. I don't want to do that out of respect for them, and I'm both the director and producer of the game. It'll be confusing if I was there and gave the seiyuu, voice actor, some instructions on top of the writers." This is Yoshida's way of respecting the writing staff working on his game. The scenario writers have wrote the scene. Writing scenes is what they do, it's literally in the name. And as the ones who are writing the scenes, he wants them to have the authority on how the voice actors should portray them. Especially since, as mentioned, Yoshida is a writer himself, and if he's there, he's going to be tempted to give his own input. He was then asked if this was the case for Final Fantasy XVI, with Yoshida saying, quote, "I'm not attending the recordings either, because I'm not the game's scenarist. During the scenario-focused meetings we've already had a lot of discussions like, this line would be a better way to show the protagonist Clive's psychology. And those remarks are taken into account during recordings." Clive's psychology, you say? Interesting. And now we get to the part of the interview that is probably going to upset the weeaboos. The game is prioritizing English audio over Japanese audio. Yoshida says, "We've been prioritizing English voice recording, and we've specifically been doing it in British English. We're using facial capture, so later on, we won't have to adjust by hand each of the faces during cutscenes. And it's full capture, as in motion capture actors are also doing the voice acting simultaneously. Well, we're not doing it for every single cutscene though. But anyway, that's why English dubbing has progressed the most. The Japanese dubbing will start soon." In previous interviews, he's confirmed that the English voice acting has almost finished recording. And here he's implying that the Japanese voice acting is way behind. In fact, this comment could be taken as if the Japanese voice recordings haven't even started yet. Now, doing things this way isn't exactly new to Japanese developers. For example, Kingsglaive Final Fantasy XV used English actors for their voice acting, their likeness, and their facial recordings. And then after that, the seiyuu then dubbed over it in Japanese. And this was also the case with Kojima Productions' Death Stranding. Though it's so strange to think about that even though this is a JRPG, that technically the English version is the original performance, and the Japanese version is actually being dubbed over the English performance. Will all the people who often try to delegitimize English voice acting in Japanese media suddenly try to play this game in English? No, I'm sure they'll find some other justification. But for those looking forward to a quality English performance, they're definitely going to find it here. I'm also happy to hear about British voice acting. I'm very much a fan of British voice acting in RPGs. In fact, it's part of why I think Final Fantasy XII and XIV, at least after A Realm Reborn, because A Realm Reborn's voice acting has some of the best voice acting in the entire Final Fantasy series, and honestly, some of the best voice acting in all of JRPGs. I think Shadowbringers overall takes the cake for the best voice acting and performances that the series has seen. There were so many moments where the voice performances in that game would have me on the verge of tears, and they were truly something special. Now, some of you may be wondering why in the first place that they would prioritize English voice acting in a JRPG. And the reason is pretty simple. The console market, particularly the PlayStation brand, has been on decline in Japan. While Nintendo Switch has been doing quite well on the fact that it's both a home console and a portable console, the PlayStation brand doesn't have such a luxury. And when you look at PlayStation sales in the West versus PlayStation sales in Japan, there's no wonder why they would prioritize the Western release over the Japanese one. There's just far more money to be made in the Western release than there is in the Japanese one. And it's a massive part of why developers have become so much more focused on simultaneous global releases, as ignoring the global market is really no longer an option for them. Now, could you make an argument about this perhaps westernizing Japanese titles? Maybe, but that's a video on its own right. However, one thing that we can confidently say at the moment is that this bodes really well for those of us in the West playing the game in English. But with that said, Ultima, I want to hear from you. How do you feel about this bit of news on Final Fantasy XVI? Subscribe, hit the bell icon, and let me know in the comments below. Shout out to patron Lauren McGregor and the rest of the Ultima community.